I am going to be using, so this is an app called Mind Maple, or you can find it as Xmind. Now, there's a reason why I've decided to do this, because as we are going through today's session, as we go through the various lectures, you will see that in terms of lecture 9 over there, we are going to be looking at how to write notes and how to use mind maps. So this application here is the version that I use when I am doing my mind maps. So I wanted to use it so that I show you. So it's literally the same thing that you would do with a pen and markers on a page, but I wanted to show you how you can actually do it in your own studies so that it helps you to retain all of the information that you need. So if you go to the study guides, thank the Lord, we now have them. Yeah. Finally, I know. So we are starting on page 35. So you can actually follow what we are going to be talking about from there. So this is my mind map, and I am going to give you guys, I'm going to show you other examples of mind maps that I have done and to show you things that you can do with it. Because I think the most mind-blowing thing that I've been able to do was to do our family tree. So I created our family tree using this just to show that, you know, this is something that we can do. All right, so bear in mind, I'm not advocating that we should all get this app, but if you want to get it, you can. What does it call? I got it while it was still free. I'm not too sure now. Oh, what is it called? I thought you asked what does it cost. So this one is called Mind Maple. Maple, exactly. So an apple, but that starts with an M. Mind Maple. Or you can find it as Xmind. Xmind. Yes. Right. So the thing that I can do with this is literally structure everything that I need to be doing. So as we can see here, lecture 9, notes and maps. We start off with note-taking and then mind maps and how they are beneficial and helpful to us. So if you look into your study guide, you can actually see this. Now, as I had said earlier, that when we are saying we are looking at lecture 9, 10, and 11, it seems like there's a lot of information. But once you put all of that information on a page like this, you can immediately begin to see the similarities. And then you are able to see, so for example, here, lecture 10, we are going to be looking at that method of reading, the SQ3R survey question, read, recite, review. And you can also see that when it comes to note-taking, we also have record, reduce, recite, reflect, review. So these things go together. And part of the purpose of what a mind map can do for you is it helps you organize complex information in a way that makes it easier for you to follow. So as you're going to be reading, very thick volumes in terms of your textbooks and so on and so forth, you are going to be encountering information that is very difficult at times. But there are ways that you can actually make that information make better sense to you. And it depends on how you write your notes. But how you write your notes also is determined by how you read. So the process of reading, unfortunately, I left one of my articles that I wanted to show you. Very difficult article to read, but there are ways of breaking down this information. So there are techniques, for instance, the 5 R's of note-taking, which is record, reduce, recite, reflect, review. You might think that I have to claim all of these things. You don't necessarily have to. Knowing what they are all about is the most important thing. And what we are trying to convey in terms of note-taking, we start with the way that we deconstruct or unpack articles. So the first thing that we need to do is to look for, and nowadays it's even easier because we can go on Google and look for a summary of the book that you want to read or even the chapter that you want to read. So say, for example, you go into the library and you want to, who do I know? For example, Cornelius Van Til. He is a presuppositionalist, and the theory of presuppositionalism is devastatingly difficult as the word is how the concept actually is. So when you get that book and you're trying to read it, the very first thing you need to do is to try and find a summary of the book online. So as you go online, you will be able to find summaries of these books. And the purpose of the summary is not meant to be the exhaustive thing that you are going to use. This is step one of how you can make sense of that book that you're about to read. So read as many summaries as you can, because all of these summaries are written from different perspectives of the authors. And so each author is going to write what he gets as the main idea, but they always do it in a very simple way. So that is where we need to start off from. And that is part of the process that is being called survey over here. So this survey involves trying to get as much background information as you can about what you're about to read. And right now, today, our lives have been made even way easier because you can even find videos on YouTube that are explaining these concepts. So depending on the kind of learner you are you a visual learner? The videos are there. Are you visual also in terms of reading? You can also, read those summaries. But regardless of who you are as a learner, you can always find the best way of understanding or making sense of these things. So the starting point, if we are saying that we have a process, first do the survey, do the background, find out what a number of people are saying about that particular thing. The reason why this is important is because when you read my summary, I am going to be focusing on something that stood out for me. Someone else will write about something that stood out for them. Another person will do the same, and yet another person. So all of these things that these people are saying, this is the most important thing, that is giving you the cue on how, or rather what to look out for as you are now doing the reading. So then you start with the reading. I like doing it from back to front rather than, front to back. What that means is, rather than immediately writing down the things that I find interesting first as I'm reading, I write down the things that have been deemed interesting by the various people that I've read whose summaries have been written about this thing. So if this person writes their summary and says, these are the most important things, I write those things down. So when I start reading, I try to pay attention to those things that other people have highlighted. But in the same process, I also try to pick out things that are interesting to me. Now, the next stage from there might sound a bit too theoretical, but it is something that helps you to better understand what you are reading. It is a concept that is referred to as scaffolding. And I believe I've once spoken about it. But when a building is being built, they put the scaffold outside. And so as the building gets higher, we put in more scaffolds. So we go higher as the building goes higher. So that concept of scaffolding is what we then have to do. What it means is that as you are reading any new material, try to find a commonality with things that you already know. So regardless of where that information is coming from, even if you are an engineer and you are now reading something concerning the Bible and they are talking about something and you connect with it from your engineering, it's still good. Because the idea is, if you find a basis upon which to build on the newer information, it becomes easier for you to actually learn it. So now I'm going to be hopping a little bit from place to place. Yes. Oh, there's a question.
Yes, that's the point. No, hey, there is right, different strokes for different books. In the Bible interpretation, you would learn that, for example, when you read the Bible, you read the Bible first, you don't read any habits. And to me, I personally, and this is the, when I read, I don't think somebody is first. I try to prefer reading the material first and then make my own deductions. Even if, for example, you actually have a graph there. If I for example, maybe the really like the like the text says that in terms of graph, this is what it is. I don't read the text to know what the graph is about. Immediately
there's a graph,
I go to the
there.
graph myself and then try to understand it. And then only the right booklet, So yeah, thank you.
No, I completely I understand exactly where you're coming from. And as you say that, there's different strokes for different folks. So the material that I work with, and I'm actually going to circulate a couple of books that I have brought. that you can just crack open and see. The idea is, more often than not, because we are not all the same, we don't have the same strengths in terms of our understanding of most of these things. So we then often try to give the simplest way for people to understand the material that they are reading. But in all honesty, I am also that way. But through the encounters that I have had with different kinds of students over the years, I've since learned to assume that, let us start with the basics first. Because the moment I say, I want you to do things the way that I do them, you might have one or two people who are able to be competent enough at that level, and the rest of people suffer because they have no understanding of what exactly is happening. So more often than not, the reason why I always use this strategy is because when you crack open some of these textbooks, they are very academic. And because they are very academic, so there's what is known as semantic noise. In communication skills, when we talk about communication, we talk about noise as being an impediment to effective communication. Mm-hmm. So we have 4 different classifications of noise. We have physical noise, where there is loud banging outside cars, so we can't hear each other here. We also have physiological noise, the fact that a person is visually impaired, or they are deaf, they are auditorily impaired, so they can't hear what is happening, they can't see, they can't read. We also have what is known as psychological noise. With psychological noise, this is where I myself, I might say, because I'm Zimbabwean and you guys are South Africans, I hate you because of xenophobia. And therefore, nothing that you say, I won't be able to listen to it because I've degraded you. Or I might say, I don't believe women know anything. So even when a woman is talking, I can't listen to it. We also have issues of racism, sexism, tribalism. All of those are part of what is known as psychological noise. Then we have the 4th category, which is semantic noise. Semantic noise emerges when you are unable to understand the jargon that is used in a particular discipline. So there tends to be a lot of semantic noise, especially when you have first-year students reading very difficult theories, literally because they have to read those things, they have to know and understand. So the best way to avoid the semantic noise is to get them to start familiarizing themselves with some of the arguments that they are going to encounter when they open the book, so that when they do open the book, they are not necessarily shocked too much by the strength of the language that they are going to encounter. But all things being equal, you really should read all of these original materials before you encounter anything else, because we tend to say that it colors how you see things. So now you no longer see things as they are presented to you, but you are seeing them through the eyes of the person that has written something. But their perspective might not necessarily be your own perspective. And it becomes difficult for you to be able to pick out your own perspective, because already you've been tainted by what these people are saying. But it tends to help, especially when there are big words that are involved, very complicated and intricate theories that are involved. So at least your survey going around doing all of these things, it sort of breaks things down for you first. It's almost like what a mother bird and a baby bird do, the mother chooses the food first before giving it to the child. Because if it just gave it to the child like that, it won't be able to swallow, it will choke, ultimately die. So as we are doing the survey, looking for all of these other people that are saying different things about what we are about to read, we are encountering the mother bird who is chewing, pre-digesting the information for us. So yes, I like that. Different folks for different strokes.
Doc, when you spoke of having to have a certain understanding, I'm not sure how interpreting for a challenge and scaffolding.
Oh yeah.
If you're an engineer and you have things in an engineering perspective, so as to be able to bring out that sort of makes it easier for you then to perhaps understand those who actually go to the level where you understand. But then another question that would be, would therefore not be a bigger contributor to different scholars that we have on the basis of their ideology, because someone approached it in a sense that he in a point of strength, it's really good to put it like that. And obviously, when he then reads it in a way that he then understands, whether it's the same person, it is exactly the same, but at the same time, teaches something different in the same text. Would then that, what you're saying, perhaps be a major contributor to that?
Yeah, so it absolutely is. But here's the thing that we need to understand. When we are reading, we are always reading from a particular vantage point. We always read from a particular position. In fact, the person that I mentioned earlier, Cornelius Van Til, who spoke about presuppositionalism, what he actually says, because he is a philosopher and apologist, and what he was trying to get at is that if you take an atheist and if you take a Christian, and if you give these two individuals evidence of the existence of God, you are giving these two individuals the exact same thing. But the way a Christian will understand it is going to be different to the way an atheist would understand it, precisely because the position that we take prior to the receiving of new knowledge is going to determine how we make sense of and interact with that information. And so his ultimate conclusion is that when you are talking to an atheist, more often than not, you are never going to convince that person that God exists, because the framework that they are using to make sense of the evidence that you are giving them is one that does not accept that God exists. So regardless of how articulate you are in explaining even some of the most plain things that a child in Sunday school understands, that atheist will never get, because we already have positions that we use to see the world. And those positions are the things that determine how we interact with the information we encounter. So bringing it back now to what you were asking, with the engineering and with this and with that, the idea is, yes, the very fact that you are an engineer and you're looking at this, I make reference of engineering because it always seems to be the most far removed thing from, say, for example, we are studying theology. What does engineering have to do with theology? Right? But I also encountered something like that because my father is a mechanical engineer and he raised me to follow in his footsteps. And so from a tender age, we had an antique Mazda 1000, small little car, and he would train me how to change the engine and the gearbox, strip the gear. So by the time I was in grade 3, I could strip that gearbox. I knew the internal working of an engine in primary school. And when I got to high school, he was now teaching me all of these mathematics and the physics because he wanted me to go and study that. But God had his own plan. Now, the problem emerged when I started my first year. I'm not doing sciences, I'm doing humanities. But because of how my father had taught me, when I looked at what I was reading in the textbooks about the way that society operates, that image of an engine came to me because I could see that society is comprised of multiple parts that need to come together and work together in a way so the word that we always use is spelled T-E-L-O-S, telos. Telos means end or goal. So the goal of society is to make sure that society does not collapse. And when we look at an engine, the goal of the efficiency of an engine is in order for it to do work. And in that instance, I began to see the similarities between the workings of an engine and the workings of society. So what helped me was to anchor the new knowledge about society that I was reading on top of the old knowledge about an engine that I already had. So my ability to notice the similarities and then be able to say, okay, so one becomes a metaphor for the other. So if that is the case, I'm therefore able to superimpose elements within society onto the way that a gearbox works. Because if you shift the gear, you don't just shift the gear. The clutch needs to be engaged. And that makes this thing do this, and that ultimately makes the other thing do that. And when we look at society, it is also comprised of multiple structures and multiple elements and institutions. And so the way that those institutions come together, and if this institution works, for example, the institution of marriage, if it works, we have fewer problems in terms of incarcerations because there's proper discipline in the home. But just because the institution of marriage is working is not necessarily a guarantee that discipline will be working. But for discipline to also work, we need God. Because God, not only is he the ultimate disciplinarian, but he is the ultimate example of what we are supposed to do. When you read through the Proverbs, all of that is showing you. So that's how I began to see the world, starting off from where I had started. So I was building onto my prior knowledge. And that is what made it easier for me to understand the newer knowledge. So we can never understand the world from a neutral perspective. We are always going to understand the world from the position that we are in. And the most important question would be, what determines the position we take? Because if we're saying that position is important because it determines how we interact, right? The very fact that my wife, her grandparents from her father's side are from Malawi means that I'm going to naturally just like Malawian people. and probably give my brothers extra marks when you see it's because of that position. But now let us ask the question, so where do these positions come from? In fact, I'm not going to answer that question today. I'm going to leave it hanging as a teaser, because this is what we are going to be looking at when we work on, what's the course that I was saying we're going to be doing? All right. Engagement, biblical worldview.
Yes.
So when we do biblical worldview, these are the questions that we are going to be working with, looking at where these positions are coming from. But for now, we just need to understand that these positions are very crucial. And because we cannot know anything outside of those positions, or put differently, everything we know is actually influenced by the positions that we take. We therefore need to understand that when it comes to reading new material and engaging with it, we can't escape those positions. So let us actually utilize those positions consciously to our advantage and say that I am going to anchor all of this new information on top of the base, the foundation that I already have. I hope that.
So you can really fix cars.
Sorry?
So you can fix cars.
Yes. I mean, I have ideas. You know, exactly. Yeah, I know we can work something out. All right. So this is something that I wanted to share with you guys. See, the difficulty is that I'm looking the other way. And so my mind is being turned around. I want to show you guys this image. And I think that this is a very interesting image. So we are going to do a different approach. Rather than me, first of all, giving you information on it, let's do the other way around. What do you guys understand? What do we think is happening here?
How one can adapt to situation, as well as what's required for them to overcome.
Exactly, for them to actually adapt. So there are a couple of assumptions that are being made there before we really talk about what I want us to talk about. So the first assumption is that we can learn. So the brain's ability to change in response to experiences, this is learning. All right, because our minds, they change based on the information that we take in. So that is in essence what learning is. So we have the capacity to learn, but we also need to understand that learning takes effort. And because learning takes effort, our ability to learn is always going to be affected by whether or not we have what it takes to do the learning. So what this diagram or what this graph is ultimately then telling us is that when we are much, much younger, until maybe the ages of 25, the amount of effort needed in order for us to learn something is always going to be less when we are younger, unlike when we are this side. When we are now in our 40s going that other side to where God said, you know, white hair, crown of glory, when we're now going that direction to the crown of glory, it takes more effort to actually learn very little. But this side, it takes little effort in order for us to learn much. So one thing that I want us to be aware of is we need to firstly be gracious to ourselves. This is something that is natural. The older you get, the harder it is to learn new things because the more you are set in your ways. But it doesn't mean that because we are older, we can't learn new things. It just means that it takes greater effort. But what happens when the effort that is required, we are unable to give, but we still have the desire to learn? So this then calls us to try and find better techniques that don't result us in expending as much energy. So we no longer have to hold a sledgehammer and hammer those books because we want the information to come through. We need to find a better and easier way because we can still learn. We just now need the proper techniques that can help us get there. And these are the things that we are seeing if you open to, what page is that you're on?
36.
Page 36. If you open page 36 in the study guide, not in the whole guide. In this one here. Oh, you don't yet have it. Okay. All right. So these are techniques for how we can actually study better.
So I'd just like to know, as we are in the student of the Bible, and then we rely on the Holy Spirit in whatever that we do, like praying, in terms of everything. Then in terms of the prayer as now, just getting the right techniques. The prayer, one of the techniques of getting the right thing.
Yeah. So in terms of the Bible, there are similarities as well as differences. Because when we are talking about academic books, it is also true that the Holy Spirit can actually help you to better understand what you are reading. My life is a testimony to that. Because since I was in my first year, whenever I read something that I don't understand, I would read as much as I can. Whatever I fail to understand, I fail. I would close the book, say a prayer, go into my blankets, and I sleep. And when I wake up, it's almost like when I was sleeping, the Holy Spirit was teaching me what needs to happen. I'd wake up and now I can literally see what this book is all about. But when it comes to the Bible, the way we read the Bible is totally different to the way that we read other academic texts. I was taught by a professor who would say, I read the Bible the same way I read any other academic book, because I don't believe that God is there, but I'm just interested in seeing the ideas that these prophets are putting forward. So in that instance, you don't necessarily even have to go to school to be a good preacher. Yes, in the Bible, we understand that there were schools of prophets, but we also understand that there were prophets who were not part of those schools, and they were doing great things, such as Elijah. So in that instance, you school is not necessarily that much important, but it is still important. We need to understand that there are certain things that we can do, but then there are also certain things that the Holy Spirit can do for us. And when it comes to the reading of the Bible, yes, which is the reason why all of us are here, because we do want to have extra information, but it is the Holy Spirit that can literally help us to discern all of these things. Interestingly, as we are explaining all of these concepts, as we are in class doing all of these things, you might realize that there is something that you didn't quite get here. But maybe 2-3 weeks down the line, you are preparing your sermon for your Sunday service, and now when you're at the pulpit, those things that we once discussed are now just effortlessly flowing out of you. And you're asking yourself, wait, but when we did these things, I didn't know. What has happened? That is where the Holy Spirit is now using the things that you have gained as a way for you to better explain and unpack the secrets of the gospel to your congregants. So the way we read the Bible is different to the way that we would read any other academic book. But it doesn't mean that we don't need the Holy Spirit to understand all of these other books. We do need the Holy Spirit just the same way as we would, the Bible. I don't know if that makes sense. All right. So when we are here, we are saying we need to therefore find the best techniques so that we don't get to that threshold where we don't completely have the required amount of energy to get the thing that we need. So we have to look at techniques of how to read and how to write notes, which is the reason why we come here to note-taking. So as you are reading, you need to record. And once we talk about recording, you have to record the main points as you understood them. But in addition to that, you also need to use the actual grammar or actual words that are being used. So for example, if you encounter a word you don't understand, write it down. But before you go to the dictionary, try and ascertain what you think the word means based on its use within the context of what you have read. Then you can ultimately go to the dictionary and get the meaning from there. The reason why it is dangerous to do it the other way, the moment you meet a word you don't understand, you go to the dictionary. There are multiple meanings to words depending on the context of use. And what you might end up getting as the meaning of the word might probably be the complete opposite, or it might lead you astray in terms of how it has actually been used in the passage that you are reading. So it is important to write down those words that we don't understand, making reference to that thing that we had spoken about, semantic noise. So write down those words, but try to figure out what you think the meaning might be. It's not always the case that you will get it, but the longer you stay with that word and that context, the moment you get the definition from the dictionary, chances are you might actually get a meaning closer to what the author originally intended than if you had just gone direct to the dictionary the moment you encountered the word.
In terms of biblical interpretation, I'm trying to understand that context of the passage of the Bible. And we've seen a lot of preachings. They then close the dictionary And they would then say this way it means, and then we thought added words for whatever teaching and they would use. Obviously, it's also the true sense of the word adaptive, originally Greek, the authors in Greek. So in this context in which you are explaining now, what would you therefore advise, especially in the biblical sense? Reading a book is fine, you can read it, but now strictly in the biblical sense, you are interpreting a passage and you come up to a way that you understand. Would that also perhaps be not correct?
Right. So, in terms of reading the Bible, as I had said, it is a little different. But the thing is, more often than not, when we are reading the Bible, yes, we are also reading for ourselves. So if a professor is reading the Bible for himself and is writing notes, if anybody from his congregation gets hold of those notes, it probably won't make sense. Because the way that he is thinking about things and writing them down is totally different to what that professor would be giving his congregants when he's now preaching on a Sunday. So the point then becomes the purpose of the reading needs to determine how we are going to do the reading. So if you're encountering this word in the process of reading to go and preach, what you then need to do, and this is what I always do as a rule of thumb, is I'm always explaining things that are coming from a completely different sociocultural and historical background. So when I read those words, I read them to try and understand what exactly was happening in that particular context. And so what is the original meaning? What exactly is the intention behind what they are trying to say? Because bear in mind, the thing that we were talking about, position and how your position determines how you read and what you read, that we can never escape from, which is the reason why we always insist in seminary that you have to learn to read the original Hebrew and the original Greek. Because written in that way is, okay, I was about to go somewhere now. The Spirit was taking me, but let me.
Just go.
So I have to just go. We need to understand that language is a vehicle for culture. So when we say language is a vehicle for culture, we actually mean that culture is contained in the words that we use, but not just in the individual words, but rather in the way the words are put together to mean something. And this is coming from what is known as, well, loosely stated, some people refer to it as literary criticism, but I take the more technical, which is semiotics. So semiotics, S-E-M, do I still have my, I hope this is not a permanent marker. Semiotics. So when we talk about semiotics, we are talking about the way in which meaning is embedded in words or in symbols, because language in itself is a symbol that conveys the elements of our culture. And when we read the original Bible languages, we are actually accessing the culture of those particular people. But the reverse is also true. without an appreciation of the cultural nuances of these languages, we will completely miss the point that these people are trying to convey. So not only do we need to read and understand these biblical languages, but we also need to be familiar with their culture. So that when we now come to our Sunday service, we are able to unpack to our congregants the historical and cultural context that makes it easier for us to understand the definition of that single word that you have encountered. Because what a lot of, I wouldn't want to say a lot, let me be conservative and say what some pastors tend to do is they use these words as an indication that they are learned. So I will tell you, so you know the Greek word of this is this. But what then about that Greek word? Yes, we understand that you know the Greek word, right? So what? So the point is, I would actually advise if you encounter a Greek word that was highly fascinating to you, but if you find it too complicated for your congregants to understand, skip it. Which is the reason why when we look at what Paul says regarding speaking of tongues, if there's no interpreter, don't do it. It's precisely because we don't want you to demonstrate to us that you know. So we don't want you to demonstrate that you know. What you need to, we actually get the evidence that you know based on how well you are able to assist the least within your congregation. That old Magogo who never went to school, who can't even probably read the Bible on her own, but has to ask their grandchild, who also does it kicking and screaming because they don't want to. So you need to explain to that old Magogo. So just your demonstration of knowledge of these Greek words is not enough. Yes, we know you have gone to school. That's why you're our pastor. I mean, so be our pastor. Help us to understand these concepts, which is why Paul says, when you were younger, you were drinking milk. Now that you're older, you are enjoying solids. But bear in mind that you are also going to take the position of the one who has to feed the young. And just because I can eat solids does not mean I have to take the solids I eat and give them to the young. All right. So the idea is, just because I am at a certain level, I know certain things, I shouldn't just be dishing it out, as a demonstration that I know these things. But what I actually need to do is to make those hard things that I know be able to be consumed by the young. Paul says they need milk. So if I'm now able to eat samp, and chew bones because, we just like amatambo now. So, just because I can eat that and I like it does not mean I can give it to my newborn. So the wisdom then comes with how well I am able to actually see that the audience that I'm speaking to requires this. But if I was speaking amongst other professors, then yes, we can even try and chew stones.
Yeah.
Is this on record, please?
Yes, it is. It is being recorded, and I will give you the all right. Yes.
So I can help you now, but you will try and clarify, especially the last sentence, because when you are, it also depends on the audience. It also depends on the audience, and because our had like not explained it, I was going to ask a follow-up question to like say that, but is that you deciding application or maybe is going to be application throughout the like test of time, you know, because you do sometimes get people in school want this other that stuff. No, thank you very much.
All right. Yeah. Sure thing. All right. So we read, we reduce. By reduce, we summarize. We need to summarize what we have read. So the process of summarizing is a process of internalization. Now, internalization is just a big word that means we are taking something in. So what we are reading, we are taking it in. But when we are summarizing, we are not just taking stuff in, we are also taking it out. Let me say that again. In fact, let me say it like I would if I was speaking to professors. We can have a good laugh, and then we'll come back to English, proper English. The process of summarizing is the process of externalizing that which has been internalized. What we mean is when I read something, I take it into my mind. And when I'm trying to summarize it, I am reorganizing that information based on how I understand it. And then I put it back out onto a page. Exactly. So it's not just to show that you understand it, but it is also to enhance your understanding. Because the process of actually then putting it down or writing it down forces me to also read what I am writing as I am writing it. And so I am constantly measuring what I am writing against what I have read. And the moment you do something, and there is a passage in a section on memory. I think it's in on chapter 11 or session 11 in your books that says you actually remember, is it 70% of what you have done? Meaning that reading on its own is not enough. So if you just read and read and read and read and read and you don't write anything down in terms of what you have understood, you are actually stealing from yourself because you've used up that much time only to get about 20% of what you have read. So if you want to become effective in your ability to understand, my brother, can you please read for us what it is saying there?
Yeah.
No, right in the middle where there's a little lower than that, that diagram.
Yeah, the average person remembers.
Exactly.
Okay, 90% of what they do, 70% of what they say, 30% of what they see, 26% of what they hear, 10% of what they read, and says 50% of what they see and hear.
Right. So you only remember 10% of what you have read, but this is only an average. And in it being an average, we haven't yet figured out where you are in terms of this. Because wherever you are in terms of this can either reduce that 10% or it can increase it. So most of us are now this side, meaning that that 10% can go even lower. Yes. Because it requires us to expend more energy in order for us to get very few things. So hence we now need to use these techniques. So if you read, you have to write it down. What I personally do, and I left my notebook, but what I personally do is whenever I'm embarking on a new project, I read about it, I write it down. And as I write it down, I don't just write a summary of what I have read, but I engage in a conversation with myself. And I ask myself, what are the implications of what I have just read? And then I take it from there. I'm writing down. So after I've done all of that, I close my books after my time for working is done. And the first thing that I do is I explain to my wife the things that I was doing. She listens. She knows and understands that that is my process. Now, whether or not she is listening to understand, but she just knows that, you know, when Daddy is doing his work, he will always come. And so I make it a point that I find someone who I can explain the things that I've been learning to. Because the moment I now explain it to you, I am not necessarily using verbatim. Verbatim is a fancy way of saying word for word. So I'm not saying or reciting word for word the things that I have read, but I am making that information make sense to me, and then based on my own understanding, I then teach it to someone else.
And can I just jump in? It goes back to what you said again. It does not necessarily mean that we are getting solid. It needs to feedback solid.
Exactly. Absolutely. So because it's my wife that I'm talking about, we are not at that same level. So I need to find the proper words to get her to understand what I have been reading.
And once it's easy for you to simplify it to another person, you are then confident enough to say that you have absorbed enough information.
There you go. And so all of this is meant to make you more efficient and effective in your studies. Is this making sense, guys?
Yes.
Are we together? Are we getting it?
I'm just thinking, if I were to follow you, we can use. I'm going to use question.
All right. But you see, those kinds of questions are also very essential, because I also do that a lot. I ask questions. Right. Where is that part? Right here. So this method of reading, the survey, we spoke about it, try and find as much as you can around this particular area. What exactly? So it's almost like saying, I need to, first of all, and this is what I also personally do. When my wife says, we take me to such and such a place, I've never been there. I sit down at home and I'm looking, okay, so I'm on the map on my phone. How do I get there? All right, okay, so right, no, this first stretch I know, that stretch I know. Okay, so all right, so this part will connect to that road over there. Ooh, but I think I'm not too sure about what is going to happen when I get to this particular point. So I always have the location handy, and I drive until I get to a place where I'm unfamiliar with, and then I take it out. I put it there, and before you know it, I'm there. And I ultimately only need to go there once. Coming home, I now know the road. So the exact same thing is happening with the surveys. So this is where we are trying to get a roadmap of the area that we are about to go into. I remember one of the times back when I was in high school, teaching my little sister how to read. In fact, I was actually teaching her English. And I was saying to her, stranded on an island of thought is an opening to her essay. And she was like, what do you even mean by stranded on an island of thought? What does that mean? And what I said to her is, even though we tend to spend the most time in our thoughts, but this is a place that we are so unfamiliar with to the extent that more often than not, we don't know how to escape it. So you actually become stranded on an island of your own thoughts. So we need a roadmap. If we understand the road systems, we are able to find a way out. But not only are we able to find a way out, but we are actually better able to understand the place itself. So that's what the survey does. And you need to ask yourself questions. You ask yourself questions at different times. And these questions might be the same, but in most instances, they are different depending on when you are asking them. Before you start reading, there are certain questions you ask yourself. So what am I about to read? What is the genre of this reading? Because remember, in the very first week, or was it the second week, we said when you start reading, you need to understand that different books have different ways of being read. The way you read a novel is different to the way you read the Bible. So you need to ask yourself, what am I about to read? And therefore, how am I supposed to read it? When you are now going into it, you need to be asking yourself the question, what does this mean? What is the implication of this? So the use of questions throughout the reading process is crucial because it helps you make better sense of what you're about to read. But I always want to unpack the things that I say. So what does it mean for us to say questions help us to make better sense of what we're reading? The thing that questions do is to alert us to the things that we need to attend to. Now, when we talk about attending to something, we are talking about paying attention to something. So based on the questions that I've asked myself as I'm now reading, so I might say to myself, after having read the summary of Beckhoff or whoever, I ask myself, so where is he actually getting all of this? How does he arrive at this particular conclusion? So as I now read, those questions guide me in trying to identify the various elements that have been pointed out or highlighted by the questions that I had asked myself. And even after I have finished reading, I still come up with more questions. And some of these questions might require being answered by yet another reading that I have to do. Meaning that before I even start that reading, I have a set of questions that I want that reading to answer. And so when I go to it, I'm now able to see the things that have been highlighted by my questions. But bear in mind that all of those questions are emanating or coming from your position. Therefore, your position matters, or the technical term, positionality. Your position matters. It helps us to make better sense of what we are reading. We only, yes.
I just wanted to get more deeper into the same position, because it seems as if it is that position which will give you a more desire to understand whatever that you're trying to understand.
So your position does that and a whole lot more. It doesn't only give you a desire to learn, but it also diminishes your desire to learn.
It's both ways.
It's both ways. So we need to understand, because this is the reason why, so my father was the sweetheart between my mother and my father. My mother is the one who really used to beat, like no man's business. I mean, spare the rod, spoil the child, that was her. And so every time I would tell her that, I don't like maths, the beating that I would get. And I would ask her, but is it a crime to tell you that I don't like this? I didn't say I'm going to drop maths. I just said I don't like it. And she was like, I'm not beating you because of what you intend to do, but what you are unintentionally doing to yourself by taking that position. Because the moment you don't like maths, you're not going to listen as carefully to the maths teacher as he teaches. And the moment you fail because you didn't listen, you have now provided yourself with the evidence of why you don't like maths. So the technical concept is called self-fulfilling prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you tell yourself, you know what, Walter is now going to be talking about study skills, I don't even know where he's coming from and where he's going, you are going to ultimately feel tired listening to me explain. And the moment you do that, you are missing huge chunks. And when it comes to the test, you are not going to pass well. And now you have provided yourself with the evidence of why you never liked Walter to begin with. Hence, I have now failed. But we are literally the cause of that. So your position, the position you take, is the thing that ultimately determines how you are interacting with the information before you.
No, thank you.
All right. So we need to ask ourselves questions. We need to read, record, and we need to recite. But here, when we talk about recite, there's one thing that I want to put out there. When we talk about reciting, we are not talking about cramming. Because some of us spend a lot of time cramming. But the problem with cramming is the moment you finish writing the exam, it's all gone. And I always used to say to my master's students, you need to make a decision when you come to my class, because you have to decide whether you want to know or whether you want to pass the exam. Because if you want to pass the exam, you can even do it at home. You just read and cram on your own. But I appreciate and give more value to a person who wants to know and ultimately gets a lower mark than a person who wants to pass and then they get a higher mark. Because ultimately, when you have a doctor who was cramming and they got distinctions, and one who wanted to know and they took longer to learn, and now they know. You know, even if someone throws a spanner into the works, the one who took longer because they wanted to apply themselves, that person has a more robust grasp of the information. And because they now understand the internal workings of the information that they are working with, they are able to do more than a person who only memorized that this is what I have to do. Failing is good.
In fact, I want to expand
Please,
That's a small comment. Now, there are books now that I can say that actually the people that are successful in life, I like the people that the teacher is relating situations. People that are successful in life are the people that are school they trying to study because in fact they are saying that person is studying typically are the ones today that are trying to set up businesses. And those clever minds actually end up working for those ones.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but then basically there are also that like say that that student that is struggling. In that struggling, they are actually learned and whole lot more other than what is in the book compared to that person who finally got those kind of experience, So this is what they are saying about life today. Eventually, the ones that actually make it to be successful in life are those ones that they are actually studying in school. Yeah, studying
I completely agree with you. Because even where I am teaching, we also have the older students. They struggle a lot, but by the time they finish, they become, because I teach at a psychology college, more of the older guys are the ones who end up having successful private practices, rather than these other ones, the young ones who, yes, they were quite sharp, but it's also because they didn't have to spend that much energy on what they were learning. It was just coming. Exactly. And if it is just coming, and this is one thing that my guidance and counseling teacher once said to me when I was finishing high school, Walter, just because your life has bumps, remember that it would have been too smooth had it not been for bumps. I said, what do you even mean by life would have been too smooth had it not been for bumps? And she's like, wherever if you try to put a car and make it run on a wet road, there are no bumps because the water reduces the friction, meaning that that car can't go as fast and as far as it could have had it been on a gravel road. So life would have been too smooth had it not been for bumps. So we need those bumps, because those bumps do certain things within us that we can't even begin to know. And the entire time we hate the bumps. But look at what was happening with the Israelites when they went through the wilderness experience. There is something that had to happen because of the kind of deprivation that they had while they were in the wilderness. It taught them to be reliant on God. But if I was born, went from grade 1 to matric, passing everything, no problem, by the time I become an adult, I have now become accustomed to things going my way. Imagine what would happen the moment, for some freak of nature, I lose my job or something terrible happens. I have not yet built enough resilience within me to take me through the moments of lack. Which is precisely the reason why some tend to argue that the reason migrants come to South Africa and make it more than the South Africans themselves is because the migrants had to go through a wilderness experience. And so now they know how to not only identify opportunities, but how to exploit those opportunities better than people who grew up with everything there. I'll give you yet another example. My grandparents, because remember I did tell you that I did a family tree. I'll show it to you. They moved from one part of one rural area to another. And the one thing that they were telling me about is how their cattle died off, because they were coming from a place. So the original area where they were staying was in between two rivers. So it was always green, always evergreen. But during the 1950s in Zimbabwe, white people wanted that kind of land. So they chased them out and took them to a different place that was dry. Now, the cattle, when they got there, all died because it was used to eating only green grass. And now it has to eat brown grass and, go for days without water. And all of the cattle died because it was not used to the hardship. But the cattle that was already there, even if you were to take it to this other side, where it is flowing with milk and honey, it is able to even thrive way more than it was that side, unlike the one that was already in milk and honey, and you take it out.
So in essence, I would say it would be better to grow up in an unprivileged or a comfortable environment, because once you overcome that and you are in a suitable, comfortable one, you can still prosper because of you are able to live without.
Exactly. But there's also an extension to that. The problem with people like you who have struggled and have now made it, we all have an innate desire to make life comfortable for our kids. And we now deprive them of the necessary hardships that are supposed to strengthen them for the world that they are going to live in.
Okay. I'm going to the word you read the recite, and in my mind, when you speak about reciting, I'm actually thinking of what you speak, where you recite poem, but in this context, we are old. I'm sure it's not doing exactly what you need. Because in my mind, there's just too many things that the question is, when you're saying recite in this context,
All right. So when we are saying recite, we are saying tell someone. Talk to someone about what you have read. So your ability to explain it to a person who hasn't read, that is what is going to make you anchor that information even deeper into your mind.
Can I comment on this? Thank you. I'd like to give a little bit with you my own understanding of things, especially when I teach people the Bible, is that when you approach the Bible, you become either a child or a mad person. Even if there's no person that you can tell to, in case you don't find that person. You have your own private space. I do talk to myself. I count the Bible when I walk. I do those moments, like you said, sometimes I take my daughter out and say, this is the self-defense line time, where we pick one line from the Bible, we walk together to a mall that day we don't pay a taxi, and we talk to that very line until it sticks with us. And whenever challenges come, you do have some what is this thing that the police wear? This vest, bulletproof kind of thing. So if you tell yourself you're an adult, you can't do certain things that children do, then that's where you also prophesy your own doom, I would say. So that's how I do it. So I would love for you to lower yourself a little bit, be a child or a mad person, talk to yourself, and then yourself.
Maybe because it's not everyone who always have someone to talk to. And immediately in my mind, something like recording, because the camera,
yeah.
when you record yourself, when you talk it, trying to decide whatever, So because I suppose maybe there's a tendency in terms of bouncing off someone, but sometimes it's not always going to be possible. So now when one needs other maybe ways of recording video, and maybe this is one way. Another one that comes to my mind is recording yourself.
Record yourself and
I think she's missing the point that I was trying to ask. It's not that one cannot bounce it off someone. The question was the research. In that context, what is it that you mean? If it means that it's fine, if it means the recording is fine, but what is it that you're saying? Because in my mind, when you speak about research, I'm thinking
you have an image that.
So the question is, are you referring to it or are you referring to something
else?
All right. I'm open to anything.
All right. So within this context, we literally mean talking, say out loud to someone, or maybe your recorder, something. Because what we want to do is the moment we say out things that we have learned, those things stick more within us. So we want things to be sticking more to you. And so the way we do that is by reciting the things that we have read. But this is where I was saying the recital that we are talking about shouldn't necessarily mimic me, because it's different from memorizing a memory verse. Because when you are reading commentaries and there is something that this person is saying, read it, understand it, but say it to someone else to see whether or not you have understood it. But in doing that, the information is actually sticking. And what's even more interesting is if you record and you listen back, you can listen back to what you have been saying and you can go read what you have been reading. Then you'll be able to notice, oh yeah, no, okay, so I think I had gotten that other part wrong. Because now when I come back to this, I'm seeing it in a different light.
In fact, that was going to be my next follow-up question, but you just answered it in terms of the recording. Is that when you recite, how then to measure if you are on the right track? But I think with the recording, you can go back and measure yourself.
Exactly.
But then if you bounce it off someone who maybe is not going to give you that feedback, how would you then measure perhaps the depth and the full understanding of the subject matter that you're reading?
Yeah. So exactly. So what I also do, because I don't record, but you still need a mechanism for measuring what you have been saying against what you have been reading. So what I do after I've spoken to my wife, the next day or the next moment that I have my study time, I go back, I first of all look at the summary of what I have been looking at before I dive into the next thing. So that is my own mechanism of trying to make sure, because it's not also going to be the case that I go out, I speak to my wife, and then after I've spoken to her, I go back and I reread and see, did the thing I say to her, at times it's not going to work. At times the only opportunity you have is your next study period, because after you're done, you're done. So that's how I do it.
So another question would be therefore, if you then recite, do you read, put it away, and then recite without looking at the information? Or do you, what do you do?
All right. So what I personally do is as I am reading, I am writing my notes. And my notes are not just points from what I've read, because I go beyond the points. I go into the implications of what I have read. I go into asking several deep questions, and then I allow myself to answer those questions on the basis of what I've read. by the time I am done reading and doing all of that, the information is now in my head. So when I go and recite it, I don't even take the books that I had or where I was writing my notes. I just engage in a conversation with her. And there are times where she does ask me questions. If she was listening to what I was saying, she asked me questions and I have to respond to those questions without referring back to the book. So I will give either exactly what the book says or my best guesstimate based on what I have read. And that process, because after I've had that conversation, I still record in my mind the questions that she was asking. And if there was something she had asked that I can't quite place, I can either immediately go back, or the next time that I'm going to read, those are the kinds of questions that are going to guide my study process. All right. So I know I have taken too much of your time. I've tried to cover a lot. Bear with me. I'll just speak for 5 more minutes and then we're actually done. And this last section deals with self-care, because part of learning, if not the biggest part of learning, is our ability to remember what we have learned. But we also need to be aware of the factors that tend to fight against our desire to remember. And health is one thing, stress being the biggest. So we need to avoid stress, but it's not enough to say we have to avoid stress, because stressful situations will never hide themselves because we have said, I want, to avoid stress. It is always going to be coming at you. So we actually need to have better coping mechanisms for stress, including actually putting aside time for us to worry.
How do we do that?
I know. It sounds so wrong. How can you put aside time to worry? Well, what does that even mean? All right. Right. So memory improvement, brain workout, check stress, with concentration. Let me see. Yes. So in terms of concentration, how do you concentrate? How do you deal with stress? You need time to worry. You need to give yourself time to worry and think about these things. So the rationale behind it. So because it is counterintuitive, and what we mean by counterintuitive is it doesn't make sense because it goes against everything that we know of. We look at worry and we think it is something that we have to run away from and avoid at all costs. But I don't know if I should be saying this within a seminary setting.
How deep in
All right, exactly, because this is the information that, So there is what is known as biological evolutionism. It's just a big fancy way of saying the way that we have developed as people over time could not have been done successfully without worrying. Precisely because worrying allows us to reflect on the things that are going bad in our lives. And it is in those moments of worry where we might ultimately encounter solutions to the challenges that we are going through. So if we completely run away from worrying to the extent that we don't think about it, we are either naive, short-sighted, we don't want to see what the reality is, and the Downside is we are going to encounter way more challenges. So we do need that time to worry. Because in that moment, something is happening. But here's the thing. Because time to worry is important and actually necessary, we also need to treat it with respect. Because if we allow the worry to overshadow us, then it no longer does the thing that is beneficial that we're supposed to get in the first place. If you allow your worries to take over you, then Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, or was it after the Sermon on the Mount? Was it in Matthew 7, where he says, who by worrying can, increase themselves by a single inch? It doesn't mean that all worry is bad, because it is human to worry. All worries will be done away with the moment we get to heaven. But on this earth, you can ask Solomon. Right? Worrying is what we do. It's part of our lives. So we don't have to run away from it, but we have to treat it with respect. Exactly. Because we don't want to give it way more power than it deserves.
Then no wonder then Jesus then says the yoke is, the yoke is not necessarily there. It's there, but it's just easy.
Exactly.
And the pain is there, but it's just light.
Exactly.
So meaning there is an element.
It is there.
There's an element of
the yoke. Exactly. So those things are always ever present for as long as we are still on earth. But when we get to heaven, then all of these things are done away with. So if we come to the realization that these things are there, they are present, they are part of the human condition, how we deal with them can even determine the way we can help others who are going through similar situations. So this is why it is necessary for us to reserve time to worry. All right, I'm done, guys. Questions?
Dan, can you again the counter?
All right. So counterintuitive just means so let me explain it, the word itself. Counter means opposite. Intuitive means something that we know innately. And by innate, we are saying at times even without experience, naturally. So maybe that natural knowledge comes as a result of experience, maybe, because we know not to touch a hot stove. And just by looking at the stove, we first of all have to check if it's on before we touch it. Right? So that's intuitive. So intuitive knowledge is that knowledge that we have. We just have something that makes sense to us. But when we say something is counterintuitive, it goes against the thing that we know. So when we say you have to set aside time to worry, that's counterintuitive. Because ordinarily we know we have to avoid worrying. We shouldn't worry. But here we are being told, no, you have to worry. You have to set aside time for you to worry. That is being counterintuitive. Yeah. Sure thing. All right. So if there are no other questions, guys, let us go get some coffee in us. Oh, yes, there's still something. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay. All right. I think I might just end up.
Once you're looking at also I know you've kind of demonstrated, but perhaps in terms of how do you develop a mind method. it's there and see it in terms of developing it.
All right.
So I'm not saying it's wicked, I'm just saying though, like, we saw it.
Mhm.
It would be nice to see how the city is developing much more. There's more branches and more
To add, okay. All right, sure thing. Um, so let me. So this is the family tree, and right now it's because this thing is difficult to. So these are my ancestors, great, 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 great ancestors, until we get to this level, Martina, that is my surname, right? And my grandfather or great-great-grandfather was called Martina, also had two other brothers, this guy and that guy, who also had their own sons there. But I don't go that far because I'm still trying to, and so this great-great-great-grandfather of mine had two sons and a daughter. So that is the daughter. And these are the two sons, Mutuda, Morove. Those are the two sons. And the first son, which is where I come from, he had 4 wives. Yeah. So he had 4 wives, and I, so wife 1, this is where I come from, the first wife. So that wife also had 4 kids. And the firstborn was a girl. And these guys, we are still in touch, very close until this very day. But that statement will make more sense when we see where I am. So this is my grandfather, my father's father. And he had 2 wives as well. And I come from the second wife. And my own father is the second from last born. Let me try to. All right. So all of these, this is my uncle, this is my aunt, uncle, 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 and that is me. That is my father. And the last born is an aunt. And with my father, that is me there. I have my own daughter. My younger brother has 2 wives. And so from the first wife, he has 3 kids. And from his second wife, he still has 1.
So he's still going.
He's still going for. He's still going for. So this is so the last born in our family is also married, and she has 1 child so far. But from where I am, you can see that is my father, and that is his own. Well, his father had 2 wives. This one was the second wife, but we can go to even the first wife because we are in contact with all of my cousins from these guys. And the fascinating thing is this guy, the firstborn of the first wife of my grandfather, is actually 2 years younger than my grandmother, meaning that my grandfather, when he was very old, decided to marry a nice young thing there. Exactly, you know. So that's where we came from as well. So all of these guys, so my aunts, I didn't put their kids, but I did put kids for my uncles, And these guys also have their own kids. And what's interesting to note is because of polygamy and the ages where some of the younger wives were married, the person who I call my brother, who is in my generation of kids, he is actually 15 years older than my father. But that's a person I call my brother because we are in the same generation together. Meaning that when my grandfather was having his kids having kids, he too was having kids of his own with his younger wife.
Yeah, was strong.
Yeah. So this is our family tree, and it's quite big because the people in my generation, the generation of kids, we are over 650 and counting.
That's a nation.
It is. And we have 2 WhatsApp groups because the family could not fit in one.
A lot of taking 2 wives.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking,
no, let me say that is a portion that the Lord has not yet given me. Because unlike some of my uncles, because goodness, I have uncles, some who have 2 wives, but even have kids with other people who are not even formally married. So, because I have an uncle from this other side of the family, from this grandfather of mine, who has 64 children. Imagine. And those 64 kids. And the surprising thing is, also because of his age, he doesn't know all of it. Yeah. Those kids are also having kids, because you see, those kids are in my generation. So you see, when it comes to the generation of our kids, they can even, because I don't even know them all. Because the thing is, I only know the first names of the kids that we used to run around with growing up in the rural areas. But when they went and they grew and they had their own kids and they got married off to other distant places, I have no idea how many kids they had. I know them, not their kids.
How many of them are in South Africa?
Here in South Africa, I think close to around 60 something members of our family. And in Zim, in our hometown, where there is the bulk of people, they were all working for, well, not all, but most of them were working in one company, because I remember at one point in time, the company my dad was working for, there were almost 18 members of my family who were working in that company. So whenever there is a death in the family, the managers are actually told, because they know that 18 people are actually not going to be coming to work. Close the shop today. So they would notify the managers so that, you know, they see what they can do. But that's because this was in our hometown where the biggest family is congregated. But yeah, that's my family.
There must be a reason why youngsters
So for me, I think there are 2 reasons. The first reason is because I love history. And I also believe that, because it was also triggered by the fact that every time I would read the Bible, I'd hear, this is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and I'm like, what about my family? Who do we have back there? And so the fact that we also grew in almost one town, even though we are now situated all across, so every town has over 50 or 60 people who are Martina who live there. I wanted a way of documenting who we are. So the next part of what I wanted to do was to sit down with the remaining elders to tell me stories about some of the guys that, we no longer have, so that I also write down, so who were these people, what did they do? Because if you read the book of Kings, you read about this king so and so, and the statement they tell you, but aren't their exploits all in the annals of the kings of Israel, right? So I wanted something similar to that, so that we also understand who we are as a people, and also because as some people are now changing their surnames because, family politics and all of that, I have a strong fear that one of our kids are going to marry.
That's what happened.
Yeah. You see.
I hope you
I am. All right. Thank you guys so very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
What a nice afternoon.
Yeah. All right, so we do have someone who is online. So we are going to take about a 20-minute break, just so that people can stretch their legs, and then we'll come back for the second session that is going to be with Pastor Dumi. So I'm going to close off now.
No.
And then we will start up again when in about 20 minutes or so.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your session.
All right.
Thanks.
I'm happy.
Thanks. Bye.